What's up? My name is Melissa, and this is Wild on glasshouseradio.com, part of the Howard University Radio Network. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Wild. And today's guest is no other than Pastor Tracie Forté. As anybody know, I am a pastor child. I am a PK, but I'm an unconventional PK, always have been. And Pastor Forté has seen me through my journey. But I love Pastor Forté because Pastor Forté talks about having an authentic relationship with God. Pastor Forté, how many years you been in AME Zion, or just religion, period?
Oh gosh, I grew up in the AME Zion church.
Okay, so basically all her life has been AME Zion, and we can understand that because I also grew up in AME Zion all my life. So no other, let's just get started. Hi, Pastor Forté.
Hey. This is exciting.
No, this is so exciting. I'm excited for this conversation because I think a lot of young people want to have a relationship with the Creator, with God,
yes.
And especially if they've been brought up in the Christian religion, yes. They don't want to deal with they don't want to deal with the negative connotations and everything, but still have a real authentic Christianity relationship with God without the nonsense.
Right.
And so as a person who is a pastor and a woman pastor, and if you saw Pastor Forté, you would understand she doesn't conform to the traditional pastor, especially being a woman pastor, that it's a needed conversation. So let's just start with your background growing up. So you grew up in the Washington, D.C.
Yes, I did. I grew up in Northern Virginia, in Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pretty much stayed in the area. I did leave and go to France for a while, but yes, I grew up in the DMV.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So first of all, hi, Pastor Forté. I have to just make sure welcome you. I just want to make sure I welcome you. But okay, so you grew up in the DMV and stuff. When did you get the calling that you want to be a pastor?
That came probably in the early 90s because I remember that I was considering, the call. I really have been listening to God, and I was thinking, no, not me,
mm-hmm.
not me, nope, not me. But I knew deep down inside that was what God was leading me towards. Mm-hmm. So probably about the early 90s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, early 90s. She is 2-time degree. She undergrad. Where did you go for undergrad?
I did attend Catholic University, the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C.
Okay, and where did you turn your master's for?
And so after, I went to Catholic U and I got a degree in philosophy.
Ooh, even better. Okay, yes. Black woman in philosophy. Amazing. All right, so let's just get right into it. Talk about your experience being a Black woman in traditional Black church.
Well, there are expectations in a traditional Black church, and those expectations are pretty much modeled. They've been modeled all of our lives, and I grew up with those models, and there is a sense of admiration and a place for it. But as I have evolved, I have really come to terms with my own true identity. So I have actually abandoned the concept of trying to be the traditional Black woman minister in the church for whatever that looks like. I'm no longer on that quest. I'm just on a quest to be who I am.
So I believe that when God created us with all things, temptation, desire, sex appeal, everything. So is it okay for a woman to embrace all that? Most of the time, when you think of being a woman in church, you can't wear tight clothes. You can't embrace your sexuality. You can't flirt. You can't swing your hair. You have to be this type person. You can't be your authentic self.
Absolutely. And I think that what has happened, there's this combination of the sin concept, the concept of sin, and these ideals, and they oftentimes get translated into God's ideals, when in fact, if you take the time to peel back the layers, you'll find that they're just people's ideals that are imposed on us, and that can be systematic. There can be entire systems and cultures of people who embrace a certain ideal for no other reason other than it's just tradition.
No, so that brings up a conversation of can religion be culture? Is there such thing as a religion culture where it's not really authentic or serving to God, but there's a culture such as, example would be Easter. Black people, we know as Easter is you get all dressed up, you put your church finest and everything. That's example to me of religion culture. So is there a religion culture in the church?
I absolutely think there is. I think that we see that in scripture when we read about Pharisees and Sadducees, and I do think there's all kinds of cultures of religion in the church. Yes, absolutely.
And how is that, how can I say, mess up our trajectory in how the church can grow?
Well, because the biblical model of the church really is one that is inclusive if it's truly representative of Jesus Christ. But what happens is people tend to interject their preferences based on learned behaviors. And those learned behaviors get interpreted into models of positions and cultures. They end up turning into cultures where if you do not fit into this particular model or culture within this organization, you're not really considered a true representative of that organization. And a lot of those models, they're not scriptural, they're just preferences that people have adapted.
No, so if I'm not mistaken, you're saying basically that is not really godlike. These religion cultures are not really godlike.
No, they're not. To me, they are covert and in some cases overt ways to suppress people's true identities. There may be good intentions because there are people who only know what they know and what they've been taught and believe it wholeheartedly. But the blessing is that we're now living in an age where we have almost instantaneous access to information. So much of what we've been told or taught or taken for granted, we don't have to be in a state of ignorance anymore. We can do the research. Very often, though, people don't want to upset their own ideals, even when deep down inside they know that they're not really true.
Right, so these ideals of people is preventing them from not being their authentic self, which is not godlike, because Jesus, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't been to Sunday school in a minute, Jesus was very much authentic himself. Jesus, if anybody is, I would say, very big into Christianity, they would know that Jesus was not in the church. Jesus was out with the people that probably today most people would shun on.
I would agree, because what happens is when these small entities grow and become large-scale organizations, very often people's identity and self-worth and value become attached to them. And so they can't even see themselves outside, especially when you've grown up in it. There's a fear. To me, what underlies all of this is fear-based thinking. Fear that people are going to be, that difference equals bad. Difference does not necessarily equal bad. And so that thought right there is that's a big myth. And then another fear-based thought is, if I'm myself, people will reject me. And then also, if we don't hold on to these ideals from generation to generation, God will not be with us. So much of those ideals they're not scriptural based. They're just people's ideals. And when you really begin to just do some basic analysis, like Okay, well, so aren't there people who are also Christians in other continents? And you expect me to believe that everybody in the globe is doing it this way?
No.
No. And if they're not, they're going to hell? What? How
No.
bad?
No, and then also we have to re-examine the Bible as blacks because that's the ugly truth that a lot of black people do not want to acknowledge is that they use religion to control us. We were stripped away of our religion, of how we communicated with our God when we were brought onto this boat. And so they gave us a Bible that was what their ideologies of what they wanted us to control to keep us in shackles. Because it's like what Lily Lynch said, don't beat them. If you can get into their mind, screw the body because we got their mind. They'll always do this. We'll have 4 years of them being underdogs, 400 years because we got their mind. And they're going to teach their kids and their kids are going to teach their kids and it's going to just keep going on. So black people have to understand that we have to re-examine, re-look at the Bible.
Absolutely. A lot of what we assume, I will be conservative and say may not necessarily be true. Now, I'll be conservative and say that, but I know that a lot of it isn't true. But it's just conjectures that have been documented by particular individuals that we have assumed are authorities on particular areas. But once you begin to look deeper, you will find that some of these assumptions are very flawed.
And it's even flawed, especially because as being women, the way women is shown in the Bible is a very issue. When you think of Adam, and Eve, is all the problems is gone to Eve. And that's very problematic because we as women, we take on the burden, well, it's always our fault. And when we have to communicate with the opposite sex, they was like, well, if they use religion, if they use God, they immediately will look at Eve. Y'all been the problem since the beginning.
Definitely. And so with that, with that dichotomy that we see in the Bible where women are very much subservient to men, we have a task that's called loving ourselves that we often don't talk about, particularly in the Christian religion, because there's this myth that self-love is evil, sinful, that it is the polar opposite of loving others and one's neighbor. And I think the fact that we have basically said, oh, well, if you are loving yourself, then that's not godly. I think we've done a disservice, not only to women, but to people in general, because when we say love your neighbor as yourself, the assumption is that you love yourself and that you know how to love yourself. But knowing how to love yourself is learned. It's taught. And everyone is not taught that.
It's culturally institutionalized, if I'm saying that correctly. Yes, basically. I was reading a book the other day and it was saying that we have been culturally institutionalized everything for unwritten rules. There's a lot of unwritten rules in society that we follow and obey, and that's the real reason why we're afraid to try to be different, because we've been socialized to be that. And the church is the biggest way, because it's like, well, if you do this, you're going to hell. You will burn in hell. And as many people, I think even atheists, they worry about their life afterlife. They're worried about, when I leave this, where am I going? Will there be another life?
And it's not until you really take the time to ask questions and not assume. So one assumption that many people have is, oh, well, if you have a doctorate in a particular area, that you are pretty much an expert on that subject matter. Not necessarily so. You know how many people earn doctorates, and I'm not talking about, honorary, I'm talking about earned doctorates that still don't have a grasp of a particular subject matter. And that is a false assumption. But that is an assumption that has been taught by this society. That if you elevate to a certain level, the assumption is that you're an expert in that area. So for me, having always had a philosophical lens, I tend to be more of a skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say skeptic, I'm going to ask the questions. I'm not going to ignore the questions in my mind. I'm not going to ignore those questions. So I tend not to take for granted or assume that individuals are automatically right. That being said, I don't assume that everything that is in writing by any particular group or religion or anything that's imposed on me to read, that it's automatically of benefit to me.
Right.
I want to know who the authors are.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if you even know who the authors are, because if you tell me the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then I already know that you're crazy, because they're not. But that is not something that people assume, that the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are those individuals.
Right.
And so I know that there are learned people with high level degrees who believe that.
Right.
And so I don't assume, because I know that, I don't assume that these people are experts automatically, no more than I would assume that somebody in the White House is supposed to be in there just because they are.
Right. So it goes to a bigger conversation that we as people have to stop looking at our religious leaders as God themselves.
Amen.
They are man or woman, and that you should be able, if they are really a servant of God, they should be always evolving and growing and want to exchange and learn the word with you. So example would be that if a pastor gives, you're in church and your pastor gives you a whole sermon, and you're listening to the sermon, you're sitting there, you're listening, you're absorbing, but you question it. It should not be frowned upon that you question it. You and your pastor should then be able to go and say, hey pastor, I listened to your survey, but I got questions and I don't agree with you on this. Absolutely. Can we sit there and talk it out?
And that's what I love. So growing up, I've always been inclined to that kind of dialogue. I've always had that mind that wanted to know more about the metaphysical. And because I was in the church, it honed into that direction. But I was fortunate that the person who nurtured that questioning process was the late Bishop Lewis Hunter Sr., who recently transitioned. Right. And because he had such an open mind to even entertain me as a teenager and a member of his church, it helped me. It did two things. It helped me to nurture that questioning process and not abandon it, and to do so even in the AME Zion Church, which is why I have not left, because he was the person who said, no, you don't have to leave the church because you have these kind of questions. In fact, I want you to make a list of the questions and let's talk about them. So recently in January, when we were talking, he did say to me, he said, not everybody has a philosophical mind like we do. He said, I have that philosophical mind. You have that philosophical mind. Everyone does not. But there has to be a place for that in the church, because that's where you get that questioning. When people have questions, people sometimes will wonder. And I love that kind of dialogue. You know why? Because I want to know too.
Right.
So I'm not afraid. There's not a fear of, well, what is it going to reveal if we do the research? Okay, let's find out.
Right. No, it's very much so. It's let's find out and stuff. So we're saying that how can someone cultivate an authentic relationship with God? As a person who is like, I'm done with churches. I'm churched out. Like going back to the Tamala Mann song, I'm churched out. I don't see a church home where it's being talked, where we can talk about. It's not one guy just saying, hey, everything I say is right, and I'm the word, and this is it, and da-da-da-da-da, and that's it, and go home.
Exactly.
Like, because that's the thing. Like, I feel like, and that's kind of changing the conversation a little bit, is that I was able to have a more authentic relationship with God and Jesus when I study other religions.
So that's so funny you said that, because when I was a senior in high school, up at Duke Ellington, I took an elective class called Comparative Values.
Mm-hmm.
And we studied Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
Taoism, Zentoism, Hinduism, Christianity. And that probably was the catalyst that even when I left Ellington and went to Catholic U and started off as a theater major,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that's what I wanted to continue, I switched my major at Catholic to philosophy because I so gravitated towards that whole, something happened that senior
Mm-hmm.
year when I got exposed to that information. It appealed to something within me. And I now know what that is. It's the light.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's the light. The light is not unique to a religion.
Right. It is. I look at religion as language.
Mm-hmm.
I look at, so how you communicate with your God is how you communicate, because like how English is just the most known language, but I would not look down of a person who speaks Spanish because that's how they communicate. I would not look down the person who speaks patois, and like I look at religion as a language. So how and language is used to communicate. So how can I look down on someone of the opposite religion, because that is their way they're communicating with their God? Because if we get into it, there's only one God. And if God knows that he created all different type of people and all different type of human beings and all type of everything, he knew that he was going to show up in different forms because he knew that, hey, I might not can't get to that person through Christianity. I might not can't get that person through Hinduism or Muslim. I can't get them through Islam. I can't get them through that way. So I have to show up in different ways. But if we're getting to the same end goal, then we have met.
Yes. And what if God can't get to them through religion, period?
Yes. That's another thing. No, that's real.
So the assumption that people make is that you're only going to meet God if you interface with a religious path.
And I think that's
a false
false
assumption.
I feel like we call it coincidence, but it's never coincidence because it's God operating.
Absolutely.
I feel when I did the census numerator, which I did this year, I didn't realize how many people is just in the world. There's billions and billions of people. So if you constantly meet somebody and keep coming into contact, God put y'all together for some reason, for a lesson, for something. So we're saying that nothing is done by accident.
No such thing. No such thing. And that's when I began to realize, okay, so when we are exposed to other cultures, other people, when we travel, there is a language of God that is not bound to religion, and it's called love.
Yes. Love and stuff, or
light.
Some people, energy healing. Some people refer, because I've been getting into chakras and the different chakras and stuff, and sage. I'm really big into sage. See, she has the chakra bracelets on as we speak right now. She has her crystals. And when I first brought this home to my father he's very open-minded, but at first his defense was
the devil.
What are you smoking? Have you been smoking some, like, no, for real, like, what's going on? But then I brought it to him. I said, Dad, in the Catholic Church, using sage as example, especially in like Rome and stuff, they actually sage the church before they go in. You see those big things and stuff, and they still do it downtown where they'll take these pots and they smoke and stuff. That's equivalent to sage.
And they use their frankincense and myrrh. And so that's the thing. So this is why I say this path for me has always been in existence. When I was a child, I went to an Episcopalian school. And not only was I the only African American in the class, I enjoyed it. Some of my best memories were at Grace Episcopal Day School, because the language of love, it transcended race. So the priest, every Friday we had to go to chapel. the hymns, what was so amazing and phenomenal to me as a child was the fact that I smelled the incense as we walked down the hall. I would look forward to that after lunch to go to chapel, because we would walk down the hall, and as we got closer to the sanctuary of the church, you could smell the incense.
Right.
And then when we got there, although this was an Episcopalian church, predominantly white, the hymns and the songs that we sang, the seasonal songs that we sang, they were almost identical to what we were singing in the African American church.
Right.
So I felt like, oh, wow, this thing called love is not unique to just the people that I see on Sunday who look like me, or the people at this church, this school who don't look like me. It's so many people all over the world who they're not bound to a religious experience. They just know God's love. And so that love, when that love translates back into who you are, then you can give it to your neighbor.
Right. No.
Unconditionally.
Yes.
You can look at people that you know can't stand you and don't look like you, and you can feed them.
Yes. So on that break, we have to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back with Pastor Forté. I think we're having a fabulous conversation about just God, Christianity, religion, and all of that. And we're going to continue more, but we have to go to our sponsors real quick. Remember to check out Wild Theme Music playlist on Apple Music. Every wild person needs theme music. Each week, our guests create their own theme music playlist. Check it out on Apple Music playlist. Go to _wild, WILD, human, HUMAN, _. Check our IG page and click the link tree for the playlist. This is Melissa on glasshouseradio.com, part of the Howard University Radio Network, and this is Wild. We are back with Pastor Forté, talking about everything about being spiritual, religion, and all that. So if you missed it, we already talked about how religion is maybe a culture that, you know, it's, you can still have a relationship and be Christian and still be spiritual. And when you say you're spiritual, it doesn't mean that you don't believe in God and Christ or nothing. It's just that you're not going with traditional religion culture, and that it's nothing bad with the religion culture, but it do needs to be examined and objectified. Just like, you know, we objectify our government, we objectify everything, we can give input. It should be also input in the religion culture without constantly thinking that you are trying to dismantle the system. No, because if we're really talking about God, God is always forcing us to evolve, and that means the church has to evolve too as well. So before we went to commercial break, we talked about love, and we talked about, you know, that really God is love, and that, you know, you should not judge other religions and culture because that is their way to communicate to God. And that God has to, if God knows that he made all men and women different and built them, and he built them every way different, then he knows that he has to communicate to them different. So it's okay to have different religions. Now, my question is for how I say people incarcerated or people who have been through trials and tribulations and stuff, and the first thing they run into is God. I feel like, especially in the Black culture, when someone has been through, especially women, domestic relationships, very physical, that, you know, hurt relationships and stuff, the first thing to do to get back on track is to go and get into the church and submerge themselves in the church. But, you know, people would think that as healthy, but that can be harmful as well. Can you talk about the harmful? Because as being a pastor and woman in the church and not conforming to, you know, I have to wear these big gowns, Pastor Forté has come in the church with a bald head. Pastor Forté has come in the church with a blue head, blonde, whatever. Pastor Forté rock locks. Now everybody rocking locks now think it's dope. Pastor Forté was rocking locks before locks was even acceptable in church. But
Well, this little sewing that I have right here, child, yeah, we're gonna do something.
Yes.
But yeah, so I'll say I enjoy being me. I used to try to conform, but you know what? This is how God created me. So let me go ahead and love me and be who I am. Because the person that I'm interfacing with every day the most is myself.
Right.
This conversation that I'm having every day, the most talking that I do is with me.
Right.
So for me, you know, when I tell me what your question was one more time.
Basically, okay, we kind of got a little bit off, but let's bring it back to basically when people are in, I say, going through life issues and they're meeting a fence and life is really beating them up, whether it's because of drugs, relationships, or whatever the case may be, they run into religion. So like, for instance, we know brothers are quick to join Islam in church. We know that women, when they get out a very traumatic relationship, they're quick to go to God and Christianity and to merge themselves into the church. But with saying that it can be harmful, can you talk about the harmfulness?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is whenever you're looking outside of yourself for solutions, the potential for disappointment is extremely great. You know, and I think that's probably why the scriptures tell us, you know, don't put our confidence in people and external sources, because we're doomed for disappointment every time.
Right.
So what can happen is, inevitably, because people are flawed, there's going to be a letdown. There's too much of a potential for putting people on pedestals. When you're looking for that soothing and that comfort, and you're looking for that new path, and you're thinking, yes, I want God, I think it's important that, yes, the religious path is there, but there are other things that you can also do to balance that. And I think those things are critical. So, for example, if we're not careful, we will become so entrenched into the whole religious piece that can become our life, and that creates an imbalance when in fact there's exercise. So we need exercise. That's huge. A lot of times people don't want to equate moving your body to spirituality. Everything is connected. Everything is connected. These are things that we have to do. We have to affirm ourselves in a healthy way. And so part of affirming ourselves is looking at those areas that we that we perceive ourselves to be flawed in, and flipping it upside down on its head and affirming the polar opposite, because we do have the power to speak those things as be not. They be not as though they were. But if we're too busy looking outside for that, we can end up in another relationship that's unhealthy, and then another relationship that's unhealthy. And then we will find out that we haven't made the kind of progress personally with our own personal selves that we would have liked to. And it's all because we're looking outside externally for solutions. To me, the biggest thing that anybody can do is begin to meditate.
Yes. And so how does one begin to meditate? Because, you know, I'm into meditation. I love meditation. I struggle with it because I don't see none of us doing it. I see it. You kind of want to be careful with white people self-help, because, you know, no trajectory to them. Without some of white Caucasian people knowing, they can be biased. They don't know it. Like, just like they've been institutionalized like we have, they've been institutionalized to say, well, this is how I should operate, and these are the beliefs I should put out. So they're not purposely being racist or prejudiced or bigot for a purpose, but this is just how they've been brought in. So because of that, they can push that out to people. So how does one really learn to meditate, the real meditation, and not what we be like,
Yes. So I think that true meditation is going to really start with us slowing down and being still. You know, when the Bible says, be still and know that I am God, you know, two of the most profound words are I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that just speaks to our existence. As a philosophy major, one of my favorite philosophers is Rene Descartes. And it became so poignant to me after studying him why he came to that conclusion. I think, therefore I am. And so for me, meditating is getting down to the very basic of it just being. So the beingness is real important to me because that whole ontological perspective of being is to me what makes everybody, that's the equalizer. We all exist. All the other superfluous stuff, that's man's stuff. There's no such thing as racist.
No,
there's none of that. There's no such thing as all this little stuff that
that was taught by men. That wasn't naturally born. But sadly, it's been a part of our history so bad, maybe 400 years and back, that we have to even always give racism power because it's so ingrained in us. It's so ingrained in our system. As growing up as a child who went to predominantly PWIs, it wasn't until I went to an HBCU so how I was so institutionalized because I didn't know how to fully shed my light. I didn't know how to fully. I was so used to being good, but don't be too good.
Right. See, that's the programming. And I kind of feel that everybody's been programmed to some degree.
Yep.
And so even when you talked about, inherent superiority complexes of people, so that's that programming. And on the flip side is the inherent inferiority complex of groups of people. That's that programming. And the programming most often is it's covert. It's not overt. So we're not aware of it. And very often we defend this programming that we've received, not realizing that it's simply programming. I mean, we will go to great lengths to defend these ideals that are nothing but superfluous nothingness.
And for the person who wants to break out the mold, they're shadow boxing. They don't know what they're shadow boxing. They know it. And so that gives even to a more because it messes their mental health. Because you start thinking, all right, there's something wrong with me. God created me wrong. I have come in encounter with people who felt like they were disobeying God. They love God so much, but they felt like their existence and who they authentically was disobeying God. So because of that, they should kill themselves because it's like, I'm not God. God doesn't want me.
Absolutely. I've been down that road, having grown up in this denomination. I was a National Christian Youth Council officer. You don't just matriculate in certain organizations without having to acquiesce. Absolutely. But even if you start at that place, if that's not your true self, there will be an internal war. And that right there will cause, as you continue to evolve, you're going to have to come to terms with it. And so there are people who come to terms with it and decide that they're going to be imprisoned inside of themselves and not be who they are. And so what they do to compensate for that is complain. They stay in it and they're not happy. And the whole time they'll complain about everything that's not right. And it's only because internally it's not serving them. But because that's all what they know, they're not willing to abandon it because they're afraid of the unknown. What am I going to replace this with? Oh, this is what we grew up. Grandma and them said, okay, go with it. But just know that you're not going to evolve potentially. And so here's the misnomer. I can't be myself and be in the church.
Yep.
Sure you can. Stop believing that fallacy. So what? If people say sit down, okay, sit down then. What? I don't care.
Because if we get really back into the church is supposed to be a hospital. And if it's a hospital is supposed to accept everyone.
That's right.
No one is perfect. No one is you're in the hospital for a reason, whether it's a small condition or a big condition, or maybe you just want to keep up on your health.
That's right.
But because of that, you should be able to authentically be
You
yourself.
should be able to be who you are. And so what we're finding, so people may start off being themselves, but then for whatever reason, sometimes it's criticism from others. There are so many people who think like I do, who they're going through the same thing, or they've gone through it, or they left, or they're still in it. But those of us who decide, I don't care, you can call me radical, I've come to terms with it. I've gone through that whole process of trying to conform, not being happy inside. And if it were not for my mother saying, let me tell you something, you better be who you are. Yes, the Reverend Rosalie Van Harper Crawford, you better be who you are. And because of that, she could have said the opposite. She could have said, "Now this is the way you better do things." And like you, I know the way. I know that model. I grew up in that model. I learned it. I got a T-shirt to prove it. I can teach that thing.
Right.
It's not me, so I'm not even going to. Look, y'all go ahead with it.
Right.
And I'm not mad at you.
No.
And for all the people who like it, y'all go ahead. But for all the people who like Huey Newton and Angela Davis, in the name of Jesus, y'all come on with me.
Right. No. And stuff. And like, even with the Black Panther Party, which I was just reading and stuff, what was big for them in the very beginning, why everybody was so willing to join, and they were very selective, because y'all have to read the biography. But at the very beginning, before it got out of control, they were very selective because they were not making sure not to make a cult. They were making sure that we have critical thinkers, people. And I think the church needs to get back to people being critical thinkers.
Absolutely.
We have not. We are programmed to be followers.
That's it. Whatever so-and-so said. And they said, so once you begin to take these golden calves off of the pedestal of our mind. See, we preach these things until it applies to the church. Then we don't want to.
No.
Yeah, we want to tell people, nope, get rid of all the idols. Well, what if you're one of them?
Right.
Reverend such and such. I'm going to take you right on off that pedestal too.
Right.
And you might get mad about it.
Right. So with that, there's an importance that I feel like that everyone needs to do is unlearning to relearn.
That's huge. Now that is the process that I'm going through right now. And so what that requires is very intentional, deliberate, the same way you would go to a gym and work out. And you have to, if you're running, you have to start with a run, a walk, a mile, and then you build all of that. Because for me, so now, because I'm in the process of reprogramming my mind, so at night I sleep with subliminals on, scriptures, affirmations, because when you spent the better part of 50 years learning society's way, some of it being not, I guess you could call it explicit. It wasn't explicitly taught, but it was taught. It was taught through the way we do things.
Rituals. You
stand for the pledge every day.
But also as a Black culture, that's how we was able to carry some of our traditions.
Absolutely.
Was through rituals.
Yes.
When we were robbed.
And so what has happened to some extent, I think, is we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I think it is fine for cultures to preserve. This culture over here, I tell my students all the time, you need to find out what recipes preserve your culture. Right. Don't let your culture go to the wayside because you're now in America and you want to assimilate. Don't do that. There's a place for your culture, because I promise you, there are folks that's going to look at your culture and not know it, and they're going to call it barbaric.
Right.
They're going to say it's devilish, it's of the devil, it's voodoo, it's all of that.
Right.
And guess what? If you're not careful, you're going to believe it.
No. I think of a teacher of mine. Her ex-husband is from Ghana, and she went over there for the first time. And when she went over there, she's from the South, and she went over there and she saw, I think it was cornbread or fried fish. It had a different name, but it was done exactly like how her great grandmother would have did it. And it was just like, so Black people, that's how we was able to keep some of our culture was through food.
Yes.
Is that the fact is that these families have nothing in common, quote unquote. We do air quotes, quote unquote. And that this one was able to stay in the country in Ghana, and this one came to slavery. You know, they got maybe 204 years apart from each other and everything. But they both know what.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I think it's phenomenal when we see those connections, because that's when you begin to see, and I think that comes from exposure. When you begin to expose yourself to other cultures and you begin to see connections, then you begin to ask questions. So wait a minute, you telling me I'm not going to see none of these people in heaven?
Right.
Only because they don't go to church?
Right. And so I honestly think the pandemic was God's way of saying, I need everyone to be silent.
Okay.
And think. Like, I think it was, like, as much as, you know, we want to use this as a bad thing, I think also he is making it come back up again, because he's like, you didn't learn. I want you to sit and be silent. Like, I think it's his way of making you really, and even though I might look at God as a man, there might be people who look as an entity, who might look as a woman. I just want to make that disclaimer to my followers, because I'm still learning and unlearning, and how I was raised, God was, we call him he.
Yes.
So,
and even when you come to some other realizations, because you've been doing something for so long, you may still do it, but with a new understanding.
Right. So when I say God, he, I think God doesn't have no gender, but that's just how I've been brought up. That is he. But going back to what I was saying, I think that he was just like, yo, sit down. Like, cause going back to the Bible, be silent. I need you to be silent. I need to put you in timeout, because
it's time to be still.
You're not getting it. And I feel like the new waves of COVID cases coming, and I don't want to ever say God is punishing us, because I think that everything that comes up in your life can be used as a teaching tool. It's not punishing it. It can be used as a,
that's right.
You get back into the swing of things. So
let's see, now that's scriptural. All things are working out for our good. So that's one of my affirmations.
Okay.
Everything always works out for me.
Yes.
So even if I don't feel like it's working out, I continue to tell myself everything is always working out for me, because that's what the Bible says. The Bible says that, hey, everything is working out for my good.
So when you talked about it, you talked about how you have started with, you listen to things at night, you stuff and stuff. So can you talk about why affirmations are so important to relationship with God?
Because a lot of times we don't see ourselves as God sees us. A lot of our hang-ups. So very often we want to attribute a lot of stuff to, you know, these entities, the devil, you know, Satan, but most of it is the mind. So we have this running conversation with ourselves all day, 24, even when we're asleep. And what we're doing is we're telling ourselves things about ourselves. And as we're telling ourselves things about ourselves, we think those thoughts are just, that they just happen. But in reality, thoughts are things. They're actual things that we have control over, and they have to work for us.
Because everything that happens spiritually, before anything happens physically, it happens spiritually.
Absolutely. And that is why Philippians 4:8 says that we have to think on those things that are pure, lovely, just, of a good report. We have to renew our mind every day. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Let that mind be in me that is also in Christ Jesus. Because most of what we're fighting against starts in the mind.
Right.
So if we can deal with that part where it's the seed, if we can keep that negative thought from manifesting from that seed state, that's the most important thing. And not only stop the negative thoughts, but replace them. That's where the affirmations come in. Replace them with positive things that God says about us. So That's something I used to do with my children when they were younger, before they could leave the house for school. I would make them read the wall. And read the wall meant they had to read all these affirmations about themselves. I'm the head, not the tail. I'm blessed coming in. I'm blessed going out. I'm always this. I'm always. And they used to look at me like, oh, God. But that's okay, because repetition.
Yes. Please go, because that was my next question. Yes.
When you're doing affirmations, very often you start off and you're doing it in an effort to believe. Eventually, as a result of repetition, you do them because you do believe.
Yeah.
So when you're telling yourself, I am beautiful, you might not believe that for real when you first start.
But somewhere down the line you will.
Because what happens is, that's what the Bible says. As a man thinketh, so is he.
So that's why I ams are so important.
Exactly. Because what you tell yourself is what you will become.
Yep.
That's why the Bible says the rich get richer and the poor get poor. If you tell yourself you're poor, you will begin to, more poor things that reflect poverty will begin to show up.
That's what Kanye probably was trying to say when he was thinking. He said the comment, probably I said it wrong, that slavery was a choice, but he did not know how to articulate it. Was that's where he's probably trying to grow down in that roots, but he didn't know how to articulate it the best.
Yes, and I'll tell you, when you talk about a battle, unlearning what you've learned. This is why I when I'm talking to my students and I'm saying, don't wait till you're 50 to learn to love and know who you are. Because unlearning requires very concerted, deliberate intentions. Even when you don't feel like it. You have to script. You have to write at least every other night. Not just what you want, not just what you're thankful for that's taking place, but also what you're anticipating, because that's faith. That's what faith is. That's how you bring it. That's why Jesus told so many people, your faith has made you whole, because it's what you believe. And so you can believe good things, or you can believe the negative things,
and whatever it is will manifest.
Whatever it is what's going to show up. And so most people think, well, see, I told you he was a dog. And see, he's showing it. No, it's not seeing is believing. Because you believe that,
you saw it.
That's what shows up. That's what showed up. If you believe that he's loyal, even in the midst of what he's doing, and ignore that, eventually that's what's going to show up.
Right. There's some reason you was attracted, and there's some reason there's good in something and stuff and everything. You have to be careful. So then that gives into a bigger conversation of being careful who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely.
And the ideologies, because even though you don't think that someone is affecting you, they are. Some way, some form.
That's right. That's right. And people, this is part of the relearning process. So now there are people who are inherently always on the negative bandwagon that, as much as I would love to, because we're addicted
to negativity.
Yes.
It's easier to gossip than it's easier to
Girl, when I tell you, sometimes I want to pick up the phone and say, girl, did you hear what that clown said? And something say,
nope.
You can't do it because you got to feed.
You're putting in that energy into the world.
That's right. You can't do it. You can't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And I'm telling you, so when we talk about that's a struggle, because that's up here.
Yeah, very much.
That's up here in my mind.
Right.
So then I have to say, oh, wow, okay, so now let me find something else. But guess what? When you've done something for a long time, your body will want to do it.
Without you even thinking about it. That's why we have to do repetition when we're unlearning something. Absolutely. Because we were brought up in that and we was trained like that. So that's all you know.
That's right.
And then it's even worse because you're going against what the elder in your family said.
That's right.
And no matter if your elder's good or bad or has flaws or flaws and stuff, there is a very high respect you give them.
That's absolutely right.
And you, even if you subconsciously say, I hated my grandmother, I blah, 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 but there is ideologies and things that she do that you still do today because
that's right.
That's known in your family.
That's right. And the blessing is in the principle of it that, okay, so yes, they may have been flawed or wrong, but because of the principle of giving them the respect that they're due, that's where the blessing comes in. That's where the blessing comes, and that's a trust. You have to trust that God is right when God says, do right by those who are over you in authority. You have to trust God.
So changing it a little bit, going to mental health and stuff, is that can cause a mental warfare in your mind.
Absolutely.
Which is, so what are your views on therapy and mental health and everything? Because people in the church are quick to say, just pray away. And sometimes with church being this such complex place that needs to be renovated, that needs to be designed over, the church is maybe at times not the best place for you to gain your mental clarity.
So that is important. I think the church has two responsibilities. One, the church has to have people either as resources or within their organization actively who can speak to people's mental health needs. I think it's critical.
And if not, they're able to go seek them out.
Absolutely. We have to have this is concerning to me because I know of many people who have said, I would like therapy. They don't know where to go.
Right.
So what resource, what database do we have to even give people to say, here's a list of therapists. Here's a list of Christian therapists. Here's a list of African American therapists. What are we going to do? Tell them to go on to the United Healthcare website
and just pray about it and call it a day. Because if in this conversation we know that the church needs work and remodeling and revamping, and we know that religion is very tainted. So therapy is a very vital resource when the church is not healthy for you at that point. But where do you go? And then also you have to go back to affirmations, because you have to say, I'm not turning my back on God by going through therapy. That's
right. We just finished reading in Bible study a book called Lasting Impact. And the last chapter they're called Conversations. Are our leaders healthy? Really?
Right.
And the author was saying how he was an alcoholic. But see, part of it is transparency. You have to be honest with yourself. And we have to, as a culture, as a group of people, we have to stop making light. So when we say things like, child, my crazy uncle, everybody got a crazy one, what we're doing is we are continuing to perpetuate the concept that
it's crazy.
Right. And instead of seeing it, it's like calling people retarded. No, that's serious. This is serious. This is not just my crazy cousin.
They have mental problems, right? And life experience shaped them that they have had mental issues.
Exactly. Trauma. And I was at a workshop, and actually this was in the Amazon church. We had a workshop on the mental health ramifications of COVID. And one of the things that the presenter was saying is that grief is now going to be probably considered a mental health issue because so many people are dealing with it.
Right. Death, loss of job, whatever it is. There's
Absolutely.
Different forms of grief, relationships, because people had to really sit with their significant other and deal with them, that they realize, oh, we just been missing each other. We haven't been spending time, that this relationship is no more there.
Yes. What happens when you've been going to the same office for 30 years and now you have to sit in your house? That's a grief process right there.
Because for some people, that's their only socialization.
That's it.
Was work and church and back.
What happens when you've been leaving the house every day in order to get peace of mind?
Yep. There's so many things to it.
But now you're stuck at home.
Right. So we got to wrap up. But I got two things. So we got to do the Wild Award.
Yeah.
But before we get to the Wild Award, what's your routine? Because I feel like with everybody listening to this, like, I feel like a lot of my listeners are going to be like, what is your routine? You talk about affirmations tonight. Can you expand, if you don't mind expanding, telling people what you do to get your mind ready? Because it's literally, you're getting you're coding yourself. You're clothing yourself, ready to to do what you need to do?
I will say my routine has evolved over the years because I've had such great mentors like Reverend Dr. Dubai Thomas, who has been a professor up at Howard School of Communication, and Dr. Laura Fleet. All of these, such a beautiful blessing to me, Dr. Laura Fleet. And then, of course, individuals that have just been like, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself. What has happened, that has also been massaged with individuals who have really, with the best intentions, pulled me along and said, you can't be yourself. You can't be who you are, honey. You're going to have to. So having taken all that in, being like totally holy roller person out with bullhorns, preaching at the metro, Jesus, 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 Jesus.
You done it all.
I have been there. And so once you begin to sit back and reflect and say, okay, what's really resonating with me? Then you can evolve, then you can develop your routine. So my routine is pretty much an amalgamation of several things. So like in the morning, when I first wake up, I go into a gratitude mode.
Okay.
And that could look like me putting on a gratitude, YouTube, or it could be me in prayer, thanking God. It could be me listening to a gospel song, praising God, but whatever the case may, or it could be me sitting there, still listening to my wind chimes with my palms up and tremendous gratitude just for being in existence. That's how it starts. After that, I go into where I start praying. I pray for my family, and then I script.
Okay.
So my scripting usually starts with more of the thankfulness for so many things that I already have, and then it evolves into thanking for what I'm believing God for. And then after that, I pretty much get up and turn on some Chuck Brown or some Red Essence, and hey, I'm gonna listen to something that's gonna get me pumped up because I gotta get on Zoom with the children.
No, that's a bomb.
So somebody right now, as soon as I said that, somebody who's spooky spiritual just said, "Oh no, she's not really saved."
Nah, because she just she listens to Chuck Brown. She listens to Red Essence. Yep. Hey, we know we're not gonna care everybody tonight. we speaking our truth. That's all we can speak tonight. So before we close out, and like we said, we gotta do the Wild Award. So the Wild Award is someone, and you mentioned people that got you to this way, but what is someone you would nominate that, because we know that no one gets here by themselves. No one gets here overnight. So who's your Wild Award? You can nominate anybody, even someone you met or someone you didn't meet.
Well, let's see. Keeping with the theme of ministry, I would say Reverend Dr. Dubai Thomas.
Okay.
She gets the Wild Award, and what I so appreciate about her is that she embodies all of that non-traditional, but she balances it so well with everything else that she has to do, and it's graceful. So I would say Reverend Dubai, and then my mother.
Okay.
Chill. That Reverend Rosalie Van Harper Crawford, she's gonna get that Wild Award. Cause see, remember, I knew her before she was a Reverend.
Yes. So you've been there through the whole journey and stuff.
That's right. So I can look at her and see, even though it's still, it's toned down, it's tapered.
Yes.
I still see it there.
Right.
Yes. But yes, I love people who are very much like that. Marion Barry.
Yes.
Marion Barry can get the Wild Award.
Yes.
And I love him because he was true to himself.
You met him actually? You knew him?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's a whole nother conversation because that's a true mayor of DC. I know people might argue back and forth, but what he did for Black people and community for DC has yet to been done again. And that's no disrespect to the new mayors, but he really looked out for Black people in a way that we have yet to see again.
That's right.
So no. Okay, so well, that's a wrap. Thank Thank you, Pastor Forté. Thank you so much. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
She knows all my history, y'all. She knows, like, just to give y'all a little backstory about me is that I was not this extrovert girl who talks the talk, who talk. She's seen me through many transformations, many versions of Melissa. So I know she's happy to see this version of Melissa sitting in front of her right now today. So thank you for listening to another episode of Wow. Please tune in, comment, and share. Also follow us on IG at Wild Human Playlist. Also our IG, Wild_Wild Human. Pastor Forté will have a playlist on there to talk about what gets her in the dean. And it's not gonna just be completely gospel. She says she listens to Red Essence. She listens to, like, it's gonna be a gumbo of things. So just follow us and make sure you click the link tree in our bio. Once again, you can follow this all on our IG page, which is _WILD Human HUMAN_. My name is Melissa, and this is Wild on glasshouseradio.com, part of the Howard University Radio Network. See you later.